About to finish the front of the clock here, I wanted to give you one more little tip. I heard Carter Johnson, who's one of the expert puzzle makers out there, make a statement the other day that I don't know that I've talked about before, and it's very important. And what he said was one of the more important techniques to learn on the scroll saw is to learn how to make the blade not cut. And what I'm talking about is when you're getting to a point somewhere, you need to be able to turn that blade inside the kerf without continuing to cut. In other words, if you're cutting along, you don't want it to continue to cut in a loop. You want it to actually stop and turn as sharp as you possibly can. So I'm going to try to give you a technique on how to do that. And basically I'm going to go real slow here, and I'm going to slow the blade way down so I can talk while I'm doing this. When you come up to a point like this, and I don't know how well you'll be able to see this on the video, I'm going to zoom in as tight as I can here. When you come to a point like this and you want to make a turn, if you just start turning the wood, you might cut out into the piece that you don't want to cut. You might, make a little loop right here. And what you want to do is you want this blade to pivot on itself inside the wood. And the way you do that is you use the back of the blade as a fulcrum. So you're actually going to pull, in this case I'm pulling the wood towards me, towards my body, and I'm spinning it around. And again, I've still got the back of the blade touching the piece and the front's not cutting. And so now I've made my turn, and I can go ahead and continue out of that cut. Now again, when I get to this piece right here, I need to turn, so I'm pulling the blade, I'm pulling the piece towards my body so that it's actually touching the back of the blade. I'm going to make that cut. Again, I'm going to pivot using the back of the blade, and I'm exaggerating this a lot to give you an idea of what I'm doing. I'm going to go ahead and make this cut right here. Now in this case I don't really need to do it too much because I've got a little bit of a loop there. Here's another sharp turn, so I want to pull the piece towards me so that the piece is rubbing the back of the blade. And again, go ahead and make the cut. Now I've got a real sharp point coming up here. So to get this, now I could, to get this point perfectly sharp if I wanted to, I could back up into my curve and cut down to this piece and then come back in and cut like that. And it'll get me a nice sharp point. Most of the time that's not necessary, but in that case it would have given me a real good sharp turn there. And then you can go ahead and turn the piece and then continue to cut out of that corner. And if you can see there, you got a really sharp point right there. So again, we're coming up on another piece where we need to make a nice sharp turn. I'm going to pull the wood towards me, let the back of the blade be the pivot point, and then continue my cut. So that's a very important tip. It's one that Carter Johnson talked about the other day in his stamp puzzle video that he was doing on my website. And I thought it was a good point, so I wanted to give you an idea of how to do that. Okay, we're down to the home stretch on the fretwork. All we have to do now is cut out the handle that's going to go on top of the clock. And in this case I'm going to use some maple to contrast the rest of the clock. I haven't built this clock before, just did this pattern last night, so I'm not positive everything's going to work out exactly like I want it. A lot of times when I build these projects I'll go back to the drawing board and make a few changes. So we'll see how this one works out, see if I like it. There's one thing I've already noticed that I'm not crazy about, and that is I think I've got the base a little bit too big. Probably going to have to go back and do a little redesign on that. So by the time I put the pattern up on the website, all those changes should be made. I think I've got the base a little bit too long for the clock. But better too long than too short. Again, I'm just going to go ahead and cut all the interior cuts here on this handle, and then we'll start the construction of the clock. This is where things start to get fun. This blade is just now beginning to get a little bit dull. So we made it through this project with one blade with no problem. Now I'll go ahead and use this blade. What I'll do is the next project I cut will probably just be 1/4 inch wood, and it'll be fine for that. And it actually was cutting in that walnut a lot easier than it's cutting in this maple. Okay, I've set the clock up here in what I call a dry stack. I've basically just stacked all the pieces up here because I want to look at the proportions of the base. And I did decide that the base was too long, so I've cut it back down to 7 inches to, make the proportions look better. And I've got a piece of MDF sitting up here on top of my table saw, and that's I want a nice flat surface when I go to glue this box up. So what I'll do now is take all the pieces and do some finish sanding to all the fretwork pieces, and I'll take the two bases and the top and take those over to the router table, and we'll route the cove detail into the edges, and then we'll start to glue up on all the pieces. I've got the top and the two bases over here at my router table, and you can route these details by hand with just a hand router if you want, but I've got the router table set up, so I might as well use it. I've got a OG bit in there, but I'm only going to use the top half of it to cut a small cove around the edge of all these pieces. So it's going to get a little noisy, but I'm going to go ahead and put my headphones on, turn the vacuum on in the router table. What you'll see me do now, and this is very important, you'll see me route the end grain of all the pieces first. And the reason I do that is because if I have any tear out on the end grain, then when I come back and route with the grain, it'll cover the tear out up. So always do the two end grain and then the long pieces second. Back over here at my workbench now, I'm going to do a little detail sanding on these pieces, and I'm going to do all this by hand because there's really not that much to do. You could clean these up at a flat wheel or something like that, but in this case I'm just going to use some small cut sheets of sandpaper and my little sanding sticks that I've talked about in my videos before that I make myself. So that's what we're going to do right now. I want to sand this with the grain so I don't put a lot of scratches in it. So I'm just going to give it a light sanding on the front. Won't need much sanding on the front. And also, I use the scroll reverse blade, so there'll be pretty minimal tear out on the back of the pieces. So I'll generally just go over them lightly with a piece of sandpaper, and then I'll take my sanding sticks to get inside the fretwork. I've used 4 clamps now to glue up the box of the clock, and you do want to take your time and try to get this as square as you can. Now, you know, we can do a little fine sanding to make the fit good, but we want the top and the bottom, you know, to sit down nice and flush on this box. So if you cut all your pieces good and square, and you take your time with your clamping, you won't have a lot of sanding to do, you know, to try to make everything fit. Alright, I've given the glue time to dry now, and one important thing before you start gluing the base, the box to the base and the top is you want to make sure that this box sits nice and flush. So when you set this down, it shouldn't rock at all, and you can see the bottom seems to be nice and flush. But if I turn it over, the top is teetering, which means I don't have it square at the top. So before I glue this to the base, I'm going to take this over to my power sander and sand this flat. I'll use my sander, the table on my sander, to make sure I get a nice flat edge. And I'm just going to work on this until I get it to where the top will fit on it nice and flush. Okay folks, here's the finished scroll clock. And you can see I've got a coat of lemon oil on it. I haven't sprayed it down with any lacquer yet. I got to give this lemon oil probably a whole day to dry before I can spray it. But that's all there is to it. A couple of little tips is when you get ready to sand your box, make sure you get the glue lines sanded real clean so the butt joints don't show any more than they absolutely have to. If you do a good job sanding, you won't even see those seams hardly at all. So there it is. I hope you like it, and we'll see you next time here at the Scroll Saw Workshop.